de partager leur écran lorsqu'ils feront leur intervention. Voilà les quelques recommandations que nous avons pour vous. Très bien. C'est un plaisir de voir qu'il y a une grande participation à ce symposium. Merci à tous de vous joindre à nous pour cette séance, ce webinaire. Je voulais dire que ce webinaire est organisé avec le plan de récupération de conservation du vautour Rüppell, donc du gouvernement d'Andalousie, et aussi tous les partenaires, des initiatives aussi qui ont été fondées afin de protéger les espèces migratoires principales de la zone méditerranéenne. L'objectif de ce symposium, c'est de compiler, unifier les informations existantes et aussi identifier les lacunes existantes concernant l'état, le vrai état actuel des choses pour cette espèce dans le bassin méditerranéen et essayer de trouver des points d'action communs qui peuvent être mis en œuvre ensemble en essayant d'avoir une synergie entre tous les acteurs. Maintenant, laissez-moi présenter le premier intervention, André Botta, le président du programme des vautours pour l'Afrique. Il va nous parler de l'état actuel des choses au niveau global. André, vous avez la parole. Merci, Elena. Je vais commencer en partageant.
And I trust that everybody can see that well. Good morning from my side. As you said, Elena, thank you very much for the invitation to speak to everybody this morning. I'm Andre Botta, co-chair of the Vulture Specialist Group of the IUCN, but also working for the Endangered Wildlife Trust and the Endangered Wildlife Trust for Conservancy Trust Partnership down here in Southern Africa. I'm really honored that you asked me to do the first session this morning to just briefly introduce the species and its global conservation status to participants this morning. The Rüppell's vulture, or as I think Peter Mundy, who's also participating, wonderful to see his name on the list of participants this morning, would probably tell you that it's a Rüppell's griffon. Its current global conservation status, according to the IUCN Red List, is critically endangered. And that's similar to a number of other African vulture species. It was uplisted in about 2015-16 due to a review that was done and then published that reflected a significant decline in the populations of a number of African vultures. But if you look at the historic status of the species, according to the IUCN, as little as about 32 years ago, and even up to 2000, the species was, in 2004, the species was considered to be a species of least concern from a conservation perspective. That has drastically changed over the next 10 years. The species was uplisted to near threatened in 2007, then up to endangered in 2012, and then 2016 was uplisted to critically endangered, where it remains today. This graphic that you see here comes from a video product that the Cornell Lab of Ornithology produced to reflect the scale of decline of African vultures. And this reflects what they consider to be the decline in range and breeding areas of the Rüppell's griffon. This was produced in 2017. And this map that you see here is the range map from the Multi-Species Action Plan for African Eurasian Vultures that was produced by the Conventional Migratory Species in 2017. And you will notice there, considering the theme of this symposium, is that line there, sort of indicating movement at that stage, sort of thought to be from the extreme west of the population at that stage into Iberia and into Spain in particular, at that time. It's indicated there. And the most up-to-date map is from the red list summary of the IUCN and done by BirdLife. And you will note there that it now indicates a clear extant non-breeding population in both Portugal and Spain present in the area. And then the map to the south of the main range of the species stays fairly similar to what you see in the multi-species action plan. But if you want to read more on how this map came about, you can follow the link that you see on the right-hand side there, go to the red list and read more on the species in terms of why it currently is at the status that it is. The extant or the resident range countries of the species currently are listed there. Those are the countries where there are breeding populations known to still be present today. And then there are a range of other countries where the species is considered to be either vagrant, resident non-breeding, or they might occur seasonally or as vagrants from time to time. And you see Spain listed there, Portugal not yet. Again, this is from the red list. And then also mention there of Saudi Arabia, where the bird has been recorded as a non-breeding individual, but the origin is not sure. Then in terms of the overall population estimates as reflected in the multi-species action plan in 2017, clearly states that the species was formerly abundant. The estimated population, according to Mundy et al. In Vultures of Africa in 1992, was about 22,000 mature individuals with an overall estimate of about 30,000 plus individuals in the overall population of the species. But it even then started talking about the declines that have been noticed in the population. And of course, we know that over the last 30 years, it has been subject to extremely rapid population declines across the range, as these maps that you saw earlier actually reflects. But the most significant decline has certainly occurred in West Africa due to a range of threats, which I'll just touch on just now. The decline was estimated in 2016 at about 97%, ranging from 94 to 99%, which is a significant decline in anybody's language. And it compares to the declines that we've seen in Asian vultures, obviously on the Asian side, just over a much shorter period of time, but similar in terms of the extent of decline over about 30 years. The current population estimate is much lower, and we know that the species continues to decline as it stands. The threats that impact the species as such have been summarized here in this graphic that was produced by BirdLife International, VSG, and other partners. And you can see there that across all 4 of the regions of Africa reflected there, poisoning by far still remains one of the most significant or the most significant factor, together with persecution, in particular in West and Southern Africa. Of course, the species doesn't occur down there, but there also is an element of that in East Africa, which currently contains a significant part of the remaining population. So those 2 threats, both poisoning and persecution, and poisoning plays a role in both of those, obviously, seems to be very significant. But then also don't forget about the role that energy infrastructure plays, lack of food in various areas, disturbance at nesting sites, and so on and so forth. So there are a range of threats that impact the species and others across the continent. Just some information, as a Southern African, I would neglect to mention that there have also been interesting observations of the species beyond its range to the south into Southern Africa. And looking at the rarities records for Southern Africa, I could find 13 records since between 1984 and 2005, 3 from Zimbabwe, 9 from the Limpopo province, which is the northernmost province in South Africa, and then a record from the Western Cape. There's also a fairly well-known individual down here in the Blouberg Cape vulture colony that settled and arrived there. The first time was recorded in about 1994. It seems to have paired with an adult Cape vulture and has been recorded fairly regularly, actively breeding amongst the 1,400 other pairs of Cape vulture at that colony until as recently as last year. There was also a record in the south or the southeast of Southern Africa, a subadult bird that I personally saw and photographed at the Arabi Gorge Nature Reserve colony, together with Mike Neetling in 2012. And there have been more sporadic sightings from various locations over the last 5 years, which I couldn't really obtain exact records from, but it's not really pertinent in terms of your focus with your symposium anyway. Beyond what we generally perceive to be most of Southern Africa, also from the Organised National Park in central Mozambique, there have been records there that were published in Vulture News. The same applies for sightings in Malawi over the last 2-3 years, as vultures start returning to that part of Africa where they were considered largely absent. There have been a number of records from that country too. And we've also, through camera trap footage in the Nyasa region of Mozambique, in particular Nyasa National Park and the surrounding hunting concessions, people have sent us some images, and you can see here one of these camera trap images showing 4 individuals of different age groups feeding together with African whiteback vultures at a carcass, which indicates that the species is probably a more regular visitor to this area. I'm heading there in about 2 months' time, and hopefully we can initiate some work there, working with local organizations and initiatives to hopefully establish more reliably what the status of the species is. There certainly are enough inselbergs and so on, similar to what we see further north in the range, that the species can potentially use as a nesting area or as nesting colonies. There've also been records from the South Luangwa National Park in 2019. So there are fairly regular occurrences of the species south of the range, similar to what you started observing in North Africa and into the Iberian Peninsula. That's just out of interest. And then the last point, when I advertised the symposium to our Vulture Specialist Group members, Ron Efrat asked me to just mention also 2 possible sightings in Israel a few years ago. One was confirmed as Rüppell's griffin, and the other is suspected as a possible hybrid. I'm going to leave that to you to consider, seeing that Israel forms part of the Mediterranean region. You can consider that and perhaps engage with him for more information in due course. Other than that, yeah, thank you for the time, and I wish you well for the rest of the symposium, and I look forward to participating when possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre.
Can you see my screen now, Kate?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Perfect.
What about now? Can you?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect.
There
yes.
There we go.
Vulture,
that makes me so happy. Sorry about this. Well, after this failure, I better kick off. I'm still in your time. Well, thank you very much, Kate and the IUCN for the organizing this. I think it's kind of a weird day, because it's a very special day, because not every day we can speak about somebody else's vulture, and in this case this is an entirely African vulture, and for us it's special. I feel kind of weird, because we're talking about something that perhaps we shouldn't be speaking about, because that's not an entirely European species. But well, there we go. That's how things are going on, and that's what we have, and so we go on. It's a very special day. It's the first time such an incredible amount of people gathered to speak about one single species, like this one, a jeep species. Normally speaking, we speak about bearded vultures or Egyptian vultures, but now we're speaking about a griffon. And that's telling, that's important for us. The key question for us is the first of all, to me, my personal point of view is they came, Rüppell vultures came, they saw, but the question now is, did they conquer? They conquered. That's the question I'm going to deal with in the first few minutes, and that's for us. It is very intriguing. It's a really intriguing species, And the facts, Andre, which I like his presentation very much. Andre just told us these are the facts. The species is critically endangered at a global level. In Africa, obviously it's not doing very well. So the point is that it doesn't look good for the future of these species. So it's sooty. It's kind of a gloomy future for this species. But by contrast, what we have at the other side of the planet, in the meantime, at the other side is we come across, we are facing a griffon vulture dependent process. It seems to be completely all the opposite. We had the first record here in Europe back in it was 1990, and soon after, since 1992, it became a regular visitor, and that is interesting. It's interesting to note. At first, it was mostly juvenile and immature birds, but soon after that, right after that, the picture soon changed, and now it is the species. The species is recorded not only in Spain and Portugal, but also in France and Italy. So that's the figure is growing up. So today, up to date, we have at least 1,006, well, nearly 2,000 records, excluding our own from Junta de Andalucía, the Andalusian government. So observations are not news any longer. So that's new. That the news is that the Rüppell vulture is no longer news in a country. But surprisingly, adult birds are present every day, all years, all provinces, all age classes along the year, and including the breeding season. And that is telling that this is relevant. And since 2004, there have been more than 10 observations of possible breeding, with including 4 attempts with griffon vultures in Andalusia. I'm speaking about in Andalusia, plus 3 more confirmed records of breeding attempts out there outside Andalusia in the Iberian Peninsula. So after this, what have we done in Andalusia according to this situation as a response to that? The first thing we've done was to include these species. It was nearly rough couple of years ago. We included this species in the list of the species we are dealt in the vulture conservation program by the Andalusian government. Is exactly the same way as any other native species. So that was the first thing we did, because we felt like we really had to. The species, what does it mean? It's simple. The species in practice receives the same treatment and monitoring level that any other threatened species, namely Egyptians or the black vulture or the bearded vultures themselves. So that was the first thing we did in our case. Secondly, because we needed this information, we cannot manage something we ignore, we don't have knowledge about. So we commissioned Fundación Migres Foundation, but in particular, Dr. Alejandro Enrubia, we will listen to him later on, to produce a full report on the status and the population dynamics of these species in our region. That was the second very much needed step. And thirdly, what we did was to encourage other organizations and key players and liaise with other people, especially the IUCN, for example, to run this symposium today. Our Moroccan, the VCF, the Moroccan colleagues, especially Rachid, good friend of ours and a master, a Bird in the Strait company and University of Malaga as well. So these were the tripod, the 3 legs of sustaining all the work. What is, after all this, what we know now about these species in the region. The region, say, Andalusia, Spain, in wider picture. Well, what we know now is that Andalusia, southern Spain, is relevant both as an entry point from Africa, but also as a residence, extant birds. So we might dare to say that a rough 96%, not all, but practically nearly all of the birds that come into our continent made it through Andalusia. Secondly, we have detected what we might regard as a crowding effect on adults. So there is not much evidence on adults leaving the continent. We have evidence of birds coming in, but we don't have much evidence of adults going out. So it's pointing out these can be interpreted as signs of settling down or territorial behavior of these adults. The information provided by Alejandro told us that we have at least, in combination with our own data, we have at least 20 adults in an overall population of 150 total individuals in our region. There is a permanent presence of adults in a specific griffon vulture colonies, plus regular breeding attempts in the last 5 years, but breeding attempts with griffon vultures. So this we know well, and this reveals obviously, and this confirms a true colonization attempt as recorded before with some other avian species in the country. So this is not new. It is new for a vulturine species, but it is not new for avian species. Furthermore, some parts, we have to say, some parts of Andalusia are really reasonably well surveyed as far as Rüppell vultures are concerned. We know what there is out there, but there are some other areas with important griffon vulture colonies, breeding colonies, with which are completely unexplored. We know vultures, Rüppells are there, but we still have not got a real picture of what is going on, but we suspect they're there as well. And surprisingly, almost every year we come across individuals showing intermediate features in between Rüppells and proper griffons. And this is a matter of debate. Sometimes it is a heated debate. We don't know to what point they are griffons or they are Rüppells. And that led us to the conclusion that, of course, are they hybrids? And every day we feel more confident on the idea that they might be. And this is also important. After all this, what is next? What is next? Well, this, first of all, it goes without saying, needless to say, we are witnessing an historic and fascinating and intriguing moment in both vertebrate evolution, because this is the kind of things we don't see every day from an evolution point of view, but also from the conservation point of view. We foresee two different scenarios for the species, for the Rüppell in Southern Europe. The first one is that if individuals manage to settle down and produce a new population, entirely Rüppell population, I mean, in Southern Europe or the Mediterranean, it will be absolutely relevant in the global context for the species. We can be speaking about a remote rescue effect. But the point is that we still haven't got any trace of it. We have no trace of Rüppells breeding with Rüppells breeding here. And that leads us to the second scenario we have in which, given no pre-zygotic barriers are working as far as we know, if individuals are genetically absorbed by griffon vultures through interbreeding, we may be witnessing what we might refer to as a vulture reversed neanderthalization of this species in this very similar way, like Neanderthals were absorbed or became diluted by Homo sapiens sapiens years ago. It might be something similar, and that's a second scenario. And a piece of evidence, just to show you a piece of good evidence of this. We have a mating pair. We have a male griffon with a male a female Rüppell. Obviously, we see there are no pre-zygotic isolating barriers. That's obvious, needless to say. But the question now arising is, what about post-zygotic barriers? Are they there? So time will tell. Time will tell. This is a fascinating moment in vulture conservation and in vertebrate zoology, if you like. And now we have final remarks. The first one is that as an answer to the first question I showed you before, Rüppells came, they saw, but we see now we know they're still trying to conquer. Not yet conquered, they're still trying to. So time will tell. It is, sorry, it's still too soon to know. We witness a fascinating moment in vulture conservation. We still don't know if we have scenario 1, scenario 2, or perhaps 3 or 4. That we don't know. Time will tell, but it is, anyway, it is a fascinating moment. At the European side, Andalusia plays a key role in the conservation of these species. That's obviously because of the geographic location in the Gibraltar Strait. And also, it confirms that listing these species as the 5th vulture species was in our region was the right thing. I think otherwise we wouldn't be here today speaking about these magnificent species. We have to keep monitoring and see what happens in the short terms. I don't mean in the long term or in the medium term either. I mean, even in the short, very short term, it's going to be telling. So we're going to be there. We're going to be expecting what happens. We're quite excited about that. And we have to be prepared for whatever come what may. And if in case we find ourselves in the need to take action, I think we're going to have to take action and be brave and courageous, because we will have to, in case we agree, we have to. If not, I mean, we won't have to do anything at all. Lastly, last but not least, of course, I think we have come to the realization that it is absolutely essential for, in this case, more than ever before in vulture conservation. I think it is compulsory to work together, because vultures in this case do not understand about borders. And I think that's the biggest lesson from that this bird might be giving us today. Together we're going to make it. I think on our own we won't, because we see this is an international problem. It is not an African or an European problem. This is something that now is out of hands. And so, having said this, sorry for the initial problems, IT problems. So thank you very much especially for the IUCN and for all these people, friends and colleagues that help us with all this. And please let us keep an eye on these wonderful species and see what the future holds, because it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun as well. So thank you very much. Back to you, Kate.
Thanks, Inigo, for this complete presentation on the situation of this species in Europe, curiously, and the interesting biological case we are witnessing, and of course, the current hypotheses that are really amazing. Now we will hear Rafael Garrido, JR, from the Spanish Regional Government of Andalusia and member of the Bird Specialist Group. JR, over to you.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm going to try to share the screen. Are you going? Are you watching?
Yes.
Yes.
It's there.
Okay. Well, I am going to talk about the situation in the other side of the Mediterranean. First, I hope you are all well in these problematic times. I hope to see you soon in person. Okay, I will now present the conservation status of the Rüppell vulture in North Africa. The information is a summary from the information compiled for the red list of the North African birds of prey. I have had the pleasure to work on which will be published soon. As a result of this review, we discovered that North Africa seems to be an important area for the conservation of the species. This is the reason of this workshop. Then I will make a brief summary because our good friends from Morocco and Algeria will go into more specific details in their countries. Okay. First of all, I would like to frame the issue. Like in Spain, until the early years of this century, Rüppell vulture was a rare species in the region. But in the last 15 years, data seem to indicate that the species is colonizing or expanding its range. That is the key question towards the Mediterranean. In addition to Spain, as Inigo told us, there is a regular population in Morocco, especially in the north, and there seems to be a small breeding population in northern Algeria. And also should be noted that the species is migrating through Algeria and through Morocco with griffon vultures, especially immatures. So, in Morocco, the species is frequently watched, especially in the north, around the Strait of Gibraltar, especially during the spring migration, together with the griffon vultures, but also in the whole country during the migration. Okay, the species is being very good monitored by Moroccan experts from Crepon BirdLife and the Moroccan Society for the Conservation of Raptors, who are tagging a lot of vultures with wind tags and even GPS loggers. And now, actually, there is a very new, interesting scenario because after many times, there is clear indication of griffon vulture is breeding again in Morocco, in the north. Thanks the conservation work of our Moroccan friends, they have building feeding stations in the north, in the Jebel Musa. Rachid will tell us about that later. And they have built a specific center to promote the settlement of the griffon vulture in Morocco, okay, in the north. So, in this way, if griffon vulture settles in Morocco, there is a possibility that the Rüppell vulture reproduction can take place, as is happening in Andalusia and in Algeria. Okay. On the other hand, in Algeria, the species bred in the south of the country, and it was considered extinct until few time. It's possible that the species is breeding in the former range in the south. We don't know, but there are very, very interesting information for our college or Algeria that there are Rüppell vultures, adult and breeding breeders, adult Rüppell vultures in the north of Algeria, in the colonies of griffon vulture. At least from 2012, but even before. Later, our colleagues from Algeria will tell us about that. In addition, there is information about migrant younger birds migrating with Griffon vultures throughout all of Algeria. And recently, there is observation of adult birds in the southern part of the country. So we believe, and experts from Algeria told us when we have doing the red list, that there is a breeding population of this species in Algeria. So according to this information, the species has been listed as critically endangered on the red list of breeding raptors in North Africa. The species could be listed as not applicable, but Junta is globally listed as critically endangered in all its range, and expansion to Algeria and Morocco could be the beginning of a colonization process because global climate change and habitat degradation in the Sahel. It is listed as critically endangered under criterion D because a small breeding population, less than 50 mature individuals. However, it's absolutely necessary for further research about its real status and the importance of North African population to the global conservation of the species. This was the reason to organize and carry out this workshop with the experts on the species in the region. In summary, the presence of the species in North Africa is related to the presence of the Griffon vulture. Rüppell vultures is breeding in the area of Griffon vultures in Algeria, okay? And Rüppell vultures are coming together with Griffon vultures migrating through Algeria and through Morocco, okay? Obviously, it is necessary to carry out appropriate monitoring to accurate its population size in Algeria, but also migrating Rüppell vultures to know where they are coming from. They are coming from Sahel, okay, together with the Griffon vultures from the West Africa to Morocco and to Spain. But what is happening about the Algerian vultures? They are coming from the same place, or they are coming from Niger or from Mali, or even from southern Algeria. About threats of the species in North Africa, Reslis found that it depends of livestock carcasses, okay, due to the almost lack of wild ungulates in the area, especially in Morocco. Widespread accidental poisoning for predator control is a problem in Morocco. It doesn't seem in Algeria, okay, but in Morocco it could be a problem. Vulture poaching for legal trade is also a problem, or we have data about that fact, at least in Morocco, okay, in local markets of Morocco. Also in Morocco, Rüppell vultures have been found drowned in artificial water ponds where they go to drink in summer months. It is very sensitive to mortality from collision and electrocution on power lines and collision with wind farms. In Morocco, several Rüppell vultures have been found electrocuted on power lines. And in Spain, we have watched several incidents with wind farms. And the other threats, as Íñigo told us, due to the small breeding population, it's possible that we have a reduction in genetic diversity in the long term because of breeding, but also because hybridization with Griffon vulture. Okay. So, what are the conservation actions we propose in the red list? Obviously, it's necessary to survive the population. In Morocco, the species is actively monitored with the Moroccan people, Moroccan government and NGOs. And Morocco, there are works to identify dangerous power lines and action plans to their correction, has also started. And they are working to recover and release sick and injured wild individuals and tagging vultures. Especially in North Morocco, our friends have built a vulture restaurant and a rehabilitation center where they capture and mark individuals with wind tags and a lot of them with GPS loggers. Rachid Karim tell us about that later. Obviously, it's essential to survive population, to determine, protect, and manage potential breeding sites and key dispersal areas, especially in Algeria. Algeria is now the focal point of the species in North Africa. Sorry. The provision of feeding station is also beneficial because food should be scarce. And the impact of wind farms and power lines should be reduced to favor the species in North Africa. And finally, awareness in biodiversity conservation should be increased to avoid poaching and to avoid persecution, direct persecution. Okay, and that's it, folks. Later, our good friends from Morocco and Algeria tell us more specific and current information. And thank you very much for your attention. See you later in the next presentation. Okay, Kate.
Thanks, Jota. Thanks for your presentation, including these recent results of the regional red list assessment in North Africa and this interesting data from the review on population status and main threats in the region. Before to start the next presentation, I would like to remind the participants to write your questions for our presenters in the question and answer box. You can write your questions in Spanish, French, or English as you prefer, as you feel easier. So last but not least, for this first block of presentations, we will hear the situation of the species in another region. Our presenter is Violeta Barrios, Program Manager from the Sahara Conservation Fund, and she's going to talk about the Rüppell's vulture status in the Sahel. Violeta, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. So firstly, I would like to thanks I can see my file. Let me check. Can you see my screen now? Not yet. Here. Okay. Thank you to the organizers. I'm delighted to see here this group of great experts and fantastic colleagues gathered today. Thank you so much. And I will just go a bit southern than JR and talk to you about the Rüppell's vulture in the Sahel. So I would just briefly introduce you a few words about the Sahara Conservation Fund, which was established in 2004 to address the largely ignored and catastrophic wave of extinction threatening large birds and mammals in the Sahara and the Sahel region. So SCF is registered in the US and in France, and we have offices also in Niger and Chad. Our main program has been the reintroduction of the scimitar hornet oryx into Chad, a species that was considered extinct in the wild. And together with the government of Chad and the Environmental Agency of Abu Dhabi, we are deploying every effort to have this species going back to the wild. but also we have been working in other fauna, and this is the vultures too, in which we started working in 2007, mainly in Niger and Chad. So I will talk to you about this a little bit more. So you have seen in the presentations, the Sahel is this band that the maps from Andre and JR show very well, is at the shore, and I think that means Sahel in Arabic, our colleagues will correct me, is the shore of the desert. And the species, Rüppell's griffon, Rüppell's vulture, is the most observed vulture in the Sahel. And it is being observed, breeding, and also present in many areas, protected areas and not protected areas. If we see here the map from the West African birds database, you will see there are observations in the protected areas, for example, in Niger and Chad, which are in blue, but also observations outside the protected areas. And this fantastic picture is from a group of vultures in Wadi Rimi, Wadi Hashim, the protected area if you see in central Chad. So that's from our colleagues in the field. We have these fantastic groups of Rüppell's vulture. What I would like to share with you, and it's great to have these experts here, is we have seen these vultures, they are very known to nest in cliffs, but in the Sahel, they also nest in trees. And this has been considered as rare by experts, but on our field work, we see that this is quite often found. So if you see here, we have the nesting group in a cliff. This is Kutus Massif in central Niger. And we also have some pictures from our colleagues of vulture, Rüppell's vulture nesting on trees. And we have pictures from Chad and Niger. The Balkanite trees are considered to be the most favorite tree species they will use. And there is also this interaction with lappet-faced vulture, the Vulture horicu, which is observed, and we don't actually understand yet this kind of interaction. So about tree nesting, I just want to share more, as I don't think this is not what you see in the Mediterranean or in Northern Africa, but it seems that it's more frequently observed in the Sahel. So there has been studies since 2010, 2013, where we observe the Rüppell's scene and collect the information where they're seen nesting in trees. That is, I don't know if you are able to see the red squares around the black dots, and when they're observed to nest in cliff colonies. If we zoom in a bit more on the second map, that's in Chad, central Chad, in this reserve of Wadi Rime, Wadi Hashim, there has been observation of tree structures used by vultures, and this is one of them. You see the picture of a vulture, Rüppell's vulture nesting on trees in Chad. And why is this interesting, I guess? It's just that these species nesting in trees, this behavior makes them much more vulnerable to poaching or to persecution, as these trees are more accessible to hunters than the cliff populations. And here we have pictures from our colleagues from Bulgaria that went to Niger, and see here you have vulture carcasses to be sold on the markets. So this is a main threat. See, we haven't recorded cases of poisoning yet, no cases of electrocution in this part where we work. But as has been mentioned before, vultures, Rüppell's vultures feed on bigger carcasses than others. They're extremely linked to livestock, so any change on livestock management in this part of the world will have an impact on Rüppell's vulture. And about illegal trade, there has been studies and interviews we have conducted in Niger, which suggest that the main consumer for these products will be in Nigeria. So the vultures are then sent to Nigeria for this. So what we have been done with SCF, so we have monitoring on the ground, monitoring breeding during the whole year in Niger mainly, and also in Chad. We have our field team. We also use drone equipment. You see a fantastic picture of a nest on a tree. That's in Chad. And we also work with the traditional healers in markets to raise awareness, to sensitize about the issue, as these vultures, all the vultures are protected, for example, in these countries in Niger. We have produced a very simple guide that you will find on our website about the vultures of Niger, leaflets and other material that could be shared with our colleagues. So with the sensibilization project, and we participate in the European project, the Life New Egyptian Vulture New Life project, and we are carrying some activities in the country. This has allowed us to work with more than 300 traditional healers and hunters to raise awareness, as in Niger at least, they are the hunters that will provide the traditional healers with the vultures, carcasses or parts. But we also work with schools, with the new and next generation. They are very important. As you see, these vultures, they occur in very remote parts of the countries where there is little or nothing as infrastructure of means, resources for these kids. So we have provided them with material for school, work with the teacher to raise some awareness with them. And this is in Kele in central Niger. So just to sum up, I would just say that the Rüppell's griffon is the most frequent vulture in the Sahel. Main threats is, as you have seen, drought, nest destruction, especially those that are nesting on trees, as more accessible, poaching or persecution for belief-based use, and change on livestock. But there are also knowledge gaps, as this tree nesting behavior, the interaction with the lappet vulture, and the seasonal movements. As it will be interesting, as can be said here, to follow these vultures. Are these vultures from these countries going northward to Algeria or to the Mediterranean? So if we try to equip them with GPS or satellite transmitter, it will be an excellent source of knowledge for these threatened vultures. We are at SCF engaged to continue any awareness raising work in the countries, and to build the capacities of national authorities also to be able to implement activities and conservation activities in the country. Lastly, I would like to thank our partners, especially our partners from the governments, without whom we will not be able to work in these countries, both in Niger and Chad. Our partners from the Egyptian Vulture New Life Project, Nature Picture Library, Alain Zoo, Environmental Agency of Abu Dhabi, and the Zoological Society of London. I would like to also take the opportunity to thank my colleagues Razak and Chloe from SCF Niger, as well as Team Vulture, for providing me with information and fantastic images. So thank you very much for listening. Merci beaucoup. And here you have my coordinates. I will be happy to exchange with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Violeta, for this update on the status of the species in the Sahel region. Little by little, we are having a clearer map of what we know about the current status and distribution of this species. Sadly, also about the threats are suffering in the different places, but happily also to know that also about the conservation actions are in place at the moment. So I would like to say thank you to all the presenters so far, Andre, Inigo, JR, and Violeta, and also to all of you that have been listening. And now is time for question and answer session. So I want to give the floor to my colleague Elena, who will pose the questions that have appearing in the question and answer box. Elena, over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, very interesting. And we have some questions here. I will maybe, I don't know if Andres is still here or has already gone. Maybe if he want to comment in the on the question of Imad Sherkawi. I don't know, Andre, are you there? Yes.
Yes, I still am. Thank you, Helena. Yeah, I did type a response direct to Imad, but I think in terms of his question of Algeria being listed as one of the, or having an extant population, that is based on historical data in the red data version or the text that's currently there. That's as much as I could determine. I went and had a quick look during one of the other presentations, and that's basically what is reflected there. So that's about the best answer that I can give with the information provided through the IUCN red list.
Yeah, so sorry, the question was for everyone. The extent range of residents of Rüppell Vulture as shown does include Algeria as well. Does it stand from recent or former data? So maybe we can also listen to the colleagues from Algeria that will speak in the next session, and we will have a clear idea of data existing in Algeria. So if at the end of the session that's not clear, we will go back. For Inigo, there was a question from Simon Tonkin. Are there any examples of hybridization in this captive vulture species, or any work to understand the possibility of hybridization using captive populations? Or, I mean, well, Inigo, or if anyone wants to comment,
yeah,
also.
That's the million euro question so far. we in Andalusia, or in Spain, I mean, so far we don't have such an evidence. I mean, compelling. The smoking gun, we don't have it yet. We have it seems to be clearly, seems to be hybrid individuals, but we don't have evidence what adults they actually came from. That we don't know yet for the moment. Maybe other colleagues have, and I have seen Mundi telling us that in Southern Africa there are clear and confirmed hybrids between Rüppells and Cape vultures, but we don't have such an evidence. Actually, we need it, but we don't have such an evidence so far in Andalusia between Rüppells and Griffons. We have what we think they are hybrids, but honestly speaking, we would have to check it out with under the light of science with the DNA, and we still have not done it yet.
Peter Bondi was commenting that they have hybrids of Rüppells and with Cape in South Africa, so we'll surely have we should surely have some hybrids also of these two other species.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So another question for you, Inigo, from Antonio Roma Muñoz. I would like to ask in relation to the figure that he has contributed on the number of adults of Rüppell vulture in Spain or the Iberian Peninsula. Is it currently estimated to be around 20 birds simultaneously?
Well, we mean 20 adults. The figure, the overall figure for the entire, say, population, it's much higher. If we include immature birds, subadults, that's even bigger. That's perhaps up to 150 individuals. The adult population we can estimate, and of course this is just an estimation. It's around estimations based on individuals both observed breeding colonies, griffon vulture breeding colonies, but also in some other areas where the number of observers is low, is very low. We have camera traps in feeding stations, and we have quite a few good number of adult birds which are clearly settled down. So this is an estimation. Under Alejandro Enrubia, he will explain us later on. In the report he prepared for Junta de Andalucía, his estimation is no more than 20 birds. But if we add up our figures from Eastern Andalusia and put it up on top of the Alejandro's figures, I think we have at least 20 individual birds, adult birds, and that's for Andalusia. The information available for the rest of Spain is not as accurate as it is for Andalusia, obviously, because we work here, and that's where we are paying a very close attention to the bird. It's just here.
Thank you. Regarding the threats, maybe we could also answer to that later with the Moroccan presentation, but Salisha Chandra wanted to know if Jose Rafael could share the data on vulture trade and poisoning in Morocco, if we have the sources and how to get this data. It will be very useful to understand more about the extent of the threats there. I don't know if you want to comment on something or...
Okay, I think is later our Moroccan colleague Rachid could talk about that with more information than us. But we know we made a project about poisoning in Morocco several years ago with the Andalusian government and Moroccan government, and we found some isolated cases of poisoning. Okay, but extending by all the country. And there is poisoning. Okay, how long? How is it very important? We don't know. We want to do with IUCN and other organizations and the Moroccan government, etc., to study it better. That's problem. But I think Rachid can talk about that out of. Okay.
Okay. Also on threats, a question for Violeta. Is the hunting just for food, or is there, or maybe for Violeta, maybe others can also answer. Is the hunting just for food, or is there other body part trade for some other non-consuming activity? So what is for?
Well, what we see is that at least in the countries we work with, it's not for food, it's for belief-based practice, some kind of traditional medicine, but not only. So they will use some other parts also for good luck or for fortune. So it's not, in some parts they will not consume this because they know they feed on carcasses, but they use very much for other practices and maybe traditional medicine.
Also for you, what is the policy and the legal framework in Niger and Chad on use of vulture parts for belief-based use?
So the vultures are fully protected by law. And for example, in Niger, the newest law is the law that implements CITES in the country. And this law is from 2019, but hasn't had the reglementation in place yet. So there are fines for the protected fauna, but of course the traditional medicine is still well extended in the country. Many of these healers are in a position in the society in the rural part of the country, so it is quite complex yet, but the species by the law are still protected. What we have seen is with the documents we have produced and working with the authorities, and in the rural parts, the wildlife authorities, because of the new law, they were still not, they didn't have the tools to implement the law yet. So we would have to work with them on how they could implement the law now, once that the legal regulation have to apply, regulation will be set up. So this is also work to be completed in these countries.
Okay, maybe we have time for last question from Pablo Manuel Dobado. Apparently, Rüppell's vulture and griffon vulture are no longer reproductively isolated. According to the second possibility raised by Íñigo, if Rüppell's vulture is not able to preserve its own identity different from that of the griffon vulture in Southern Europe, should they be considered the same species? So maybe yes, for you, Íñigo.
Well, I don't know.
Hybridization thing is releasing
well,
many
we
issues.
still don't know. I think perhaps we should learn a little bit more about what happened with, or is actually happening, going on with seagulls in our region. Perhaps I don't think I'm the right person to ask, because it's long ago. I left evolutive zoology at the university. What we do know is that perhaps we're not facing, in our human consideration of a species, we tend to we normally classify everything in boxes. This species, this box is we call it the Rüppell vulture. This other box, the next one, next door is called the griffon vulture. The other one is called whatever. Perhaps we're not talking about isolated or established rigid species. Perhaps we're talking about super species. That's not unheard in avian evolution. We have very good examples, recent examples in other birds. Not, I don't mean vultures. In seagulls, in passerines, that's ordinary. That's a rule of thumb. I think perhaps we're facing something like that. Are they different species? We don't know. Perhaps Pablo is right in that sense. Perhaps everything is not so prefixated as we think. I think it's time for us to think outside the box. We've been thinking about this species is this one, or that one is the other one. I think we are. What nature is teaching us is that we have to change our mind and to think out the box a little. I think for that purpose, this workshop, this symposium is wonderful. That's a very good question. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, we have some comments in the chat on the questions and answers on possible hybridization cases. For example, VulPro currently has a suspected Rüppell's vulture hybrid in captivity. They are waiting on results from DNA. So I guess all this research is just starting. We will know more in coming years. So I think for the questions we are fine. I don't know if you have anyone has any other question or comment from panelists that would like to complement any of the answers. Oh. Otherwise, I think we can go for the break.
Yeah, before to have time for break, can I ask you, the presenters, to please turn on the video for having a picture, a souvenir. Thank you.
And for the attendees, for those who hasn't, please, for the attendees, if you can write on the chat, if you haven't done it, your information on full name, where do you come from, country, organization, just so everyone knows who is here. And if you have some work linked to the species. Thank you.
Yeah. Please keep connected. We will silence our micros and we will be back at 11:35. Second block of presentations. Thank you very much, the presenters. Thanks to the interpreters for the great job in this first session, and we see you in 15 minutes. Thanks.
Don't disconnect, please.
Don't disconnect, yeah.
But we don't see much of the presenters. You have to put your camera on or your picture if you want. Smile.
Yes, I already took a picture.
You already? Okay.
Yes,
fine.
I did.
Maybe with the cameras on, if you can, please. Good, thank you.
Thanks, Elena. I'm going to disconnect. The battery's gone, but hoping to get the recording and yeah, all the best for the rest of the meeting. It's really, really interesting material that you're working through, and I'm looking forward to engaging more on this, and good luck with the rest of the workshop.
Thank you. Thank you, Andre.
Thanks, Andre.
Thank you, Andre.
Thanks. Good to see everybody again. Inigo?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Take care, Andre.
for sure. If there
Get
is
that
something
haircut
else,
next time.
keep in touch.
Zay, good seeing you as well. We need to catch up next week.
Sure.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you, Andre.
Excellent. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hola, Elena.
Hola, Karim.
Rachid.
Rashid.
Ah, Rashid. No veo
Sí.
quién es.
Ah, vale. Pues te digo que Karim por fin no puede estar. Tiene mucho trabajo. Me viene de llamar. Así que yo haré las dos presentaciones. Y también
Vale.
propongo que voy a compartir la presentación de mi pantalla, ¿vale?
Second block of presentations. You know, we are revising in this webinar what's information available from the different areas, from the global level, sub-regional level, which constitutes the species distribution range of the Rüppell's Vulture. So now we are going to go to the national scale and to hear our experts from Morocco and Algeria. So let's hear now to Rachid El Kamlichi, member of Rüppell, with a presentation prepared by Rachid, and Karim Rousselon from the Association Marocaine pour la Protection des Rapaces. It's a member of the International Association for Falconry. And now, Rachid, over to you. Thanks.
Merci à tous, à toutes et à tous. Moi, je partage devant l'écran avec vous. OK. OK, c'est bien partagé?
Oui, c'est bon, on le voit.
Très bien. Bon, on commence par le statut actuel du Vulture de Rüppell au Maroc. Le Vulture de Rüppell a été observé pour la première fois au Maroc en juin 2000, d'où Jebel Moussa sur la rive sud du détroit de Gibraltar. Au cours des années suivantes, les observations de l'espèce ont connu une augmentation remarquable. Voilà ici un tableau des observations. Remarquable dû au suivi régulier des rapaces en migration menés par l'unité régionale de Tangitétoile al-Husima de Grépom et par des autres ornithologues marocains et étrangers, passés d'un individu observé en 2012 à 55 individus observés en 2020. Et comme vous voyez sur le tableau, chaque année, on voyait qu'en 2012, il y a eu une observation d'un individu et à partir de là, on a commencé à avoir plus d'augmentation jusqu'à arriver à 2020, où il a été le record pour le Maroc de 55 individus. Cette augmentation du nombre d'observations de Vulture de Rüppell dans le détroit de Gibraltar et plus particulièrement à Jebel Moussa est probablement due au nombre croissant de Vultures fauves et hibernants en Afrique subsaharienne, notamment au Sénégal et dans les pays voisins. Là, les Vultures de Rüppell partageant les dortoirs et fréquentant les mêmes habitats d'alimentation que les Vultures fauves. Lors de voyages de retour vers l'Europe au printemps, des Vultures fauves sont suivis par des Vultures de Rüppell immatures, attirés par ces mouvements de masse qui les conduisent vers le nord. La catégorie phénologique de Vulture de Rüppell a été mise à jour en 2020 par la Commission d'homologation marocaine. Elle est passée de visiteur accidentel migrateur de passage à migrateur en long cours. Ce qui concerne le suivi scientifique de Vulture de Rüppell, un programme de
Excuse
suivi.
me.
Oui. Un programme de suivi a été lancé.
Rachid,
Oui.
can you hear me? Sorry.
¿Cómo?
¿Me puedes oír?
Sí, te oigo.
Que tenemos.
D'accord. D'accord, je vais essayer de l'agrandir. OK. C'est bon? D'accord.
Oui, c'est mieux.
Merci à vous.
C'est bon, merci.
D'accord. Oui. Bon, j'ai le micro de portable, de PC. Intégré. D'accord. Bon, cette augmentation d'observation de Vulture de Rüppell dans le détroit de Gibraltar et particulièrement au Jebel Moussa est probablement dû au croisement. Ça, on a déjà parlé. Bon, je passe au suivi scientifique. Un programme de suivi scientifique de Vulture de Rüppell a été lancé en juin 2020 par le département des eaux et forêts et le groupe de recherche pour la protection des oiseaux au Maroc, Grépom, en collaboration avec l'Association marocaine pour la protection des rapaces et l'Émirat Arab Wildlife Propagation. Ce programme a dû au sein du centre de réhabilitation des Vultures de CRV de Jebel Moussa, ce qui est plusieurs de Vultures de Rüppell ont été capturées en volière et marquées avec tag alert. Si on parle de 26 individus immatures, totalement immatures, durant les mois de juin et août, dont 12 ont été équipés avec des balises GPS et agro-satellites. Le suivi des individus marqués avec des tags alert et d'autres équipés avec des balises GPS nous a permis d'approfondir notre connaissance sur le comportement migratoire de ce vautour et les menaces pesant sur l'espèce, qui parcourt durant ces migrations nord-sud, et les aires clés qui sont utilisées en Afrique subsaharienne. Selon les données collectées à partir des balises GPS agrosatellites, certains vautours ont tenté de traverser le détroit de Gibraltar sans succès. Ce qui soutient notre hypothèse de que l'espèce montre une forte de puissance sur son lancé au-dessus de mer. Comme vous voyez sur ces deux cartes, on a pris deux échantillons. Première carte à gauche, c'est le parcours d'un vautour qu'on a appelé N1 entre le 19 juin et le 26 août 2020. Et comme vous voyez sur la carte, c'était le période de pleine migration des vautours fauves vers le nord. Ce vautour-là a tenté de traverser le détroit, mais il a trouvé carrément l'obstacle du détroit de Gibraltar, la mer. Et ce qu'on montre, c'est qu'il reste patente sur ces cartes que ce vautour ne pouvait pas traverser le détroit de Gibraltar. Et à part ça, on voyait à gauche, à droite, il a fait toute la partie de la péninsule Tangitan pour essayer de trouver une sortie terrestre, mais malheureusement, il n'y a pas. Et en fin de compte, il a retourné vers l'Afrique subsaharienne. Le même cas pour un autre échantillon de parcours d'un autre vautour qu'on a appelé L1, qu'il a essayé la même chose, même on voyait quelques traces de vol sur mer, quelques 2 kilomètres, mais malgré ça, il n'a pas arrivé à traverser le détroit de Gibraltar, il s'est reculé et après il s'est retourné vers l'Afrique subsaharienne. Le trajet de retour de l'espèce vers l'Afrique subsaharienne, on connaît plusieurs voies, passer par la Mauritanie, le Maroc, sud-ouest de l'Algérie, la Mauritanie, le Maroc, sud-ouest de l'Algérie et le Mali. Comme vous voyez sur cette carte, on voit que ces vautours, ça on a un exemple des 3 échantillons des vautours qui ils ont été équipés par des balises GPS. Comme vous voyez, c'est sur la carte. Bon, quand chacun de ces vautours, il a pris un voie différent. Comme vous voyez, un qui s'approchait carrément vers l'ouest l'ouest vers l'Atlantique, l'autre il a passé par le milieu, et le troisième il a passé par l'est du Maroc, sud-ouest de l'Algérie, et après une petite partie il a passé une petite portion de la Mauritanie, et enfin il a passé par le Mali. Concernant l'hivernage des vautours, la plupart des vautours ils sont installés on dirait ils sont installés dans la partie de Gambie. Un seul vautour, il a passé 4 mois dans la partie de Burkina Faso. Mais ça restait patente que la plupart des vautours, leur destin final, c'était le Sénégal, la Gambie.
5 minutes, Rachid.
D'accord. On a aussi quelques échantillons sur le statut des 5 oiseaux équipés avec balises GPS. On a remarqué qu'il a eu une forte mortalité des sous-vautours pendant le retour vers l'Afrique subsaharienne. On a ici des exemples, par exemple, de M6. Celui-là, il est mort électrocuté dans le Tangirois fin octobre 2020. On a un autre N25 récupéré affaibli au Maroc, dans le Haut-Atlas occidental, le 13 novembre 2020, placé en volière. On a M16 mort à la frontière entre Sénégal et Gambie le 3 mars 2021. On a un autre M22 mort à Burkina Faso le 12 décembre 2020 et M4 mort en Mauritanie le 1 novembre 2020. Bon, les causes de mortalité pour Vulture sont différentes. Une grande partie a été, on dirait, à part ces données qu'on a récupérées à partir des balises GPS, on a aussi, comme je viens de dire, le total des oiseaux qui ont été équipés sont 26 oiseaux. On a eu aussi des données sur des oiseaux qui sont marqués avec des tags à l'air. Aussi, on a reçu des informations des oiseaux perdus trouvés affaiblis en désert, soit en Mauritanie, soit au sud du Maroc. Mais les causes principales de mortalité pour ces Vultures, c'était première chose, c'était la faiblesse. Et après ça, on a eu 3 cas d'électrocution ou bien des collisions avec des lignes électriques et des autres cas on dirait des causes non identifiées, c'est-à-dire des Vultures perdus, mais on n'a pas arrivé à avoir des données car les endroits où ils ont été perdus, reculés, n'avaient pas de moyens pour arriver à les trouver. Et voilà, c'est tout pour notre présentation et on reste ouvert pour des questions antérieures. Et merci pour votre attention.
Thanks, Rashid. Thanks for this nice picture. What is the knowledge level in Morocco and the work is being doing in this country, and of course it's evident the need for having these monitoring programs to know more about the distribution and movements of these species, and also the valuable information that give us for know more about the causes of mortality for this species. So to complete this picture, we are now to hear Amina Felous Giardini and Lawardi Giardini from the Mouvement Écologique Algérien and the Direction Générale des Forêts Algérie, who will talk about the latest data from this species in Algeria. Over to you, Amina and Lawardi.
Merci. En train de partager l'écran. Vous m'entendez?
Très bas. Pas beaucoup de son.
Vous m'entendez?
Loin. Vous pouvez approcher le micro?
Je me rapproche du micro.
C'est bon, oui, c'est mieux. Là, on ne voit pas votre présentation. She disappeared.
Maybe we can start with Hafeda and then give pass to Amina and Lawardi. You agree? Okay, so we now give the floor to Hafeda Benamar from the Parc National of Tlemcen and focal point of the AFWA. So Hafeda, over to you. Please unmute your micro.
Vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez? Donc,
Oui, s'il vous plaît, parlez plus haut pour les...
Plus haut, d'accord. Est-ce que vous pouvez me passer la présentation? Vous m'entendez bien?
Oui, oui, c'est bon. Attendez. Je pense que c'est bon pour les interprètes. Oui. D'accord. J'arrive. Not great sound. Donc, si vous pouvez vous approcher bien du micro et pas bouger. Et parler.
C'est bon comme ça?
Oui, mais il faut muter un de vos micros. Je crois que vous avez deux.
Ah, d'accord. Attends.
Donc,
Oui,
vous mutez l'un et utilisez l'autre, pas les deux.
D'accord. C'est bien comme ça?
Oui, c'est mieux.
Ok, d'accord. Donc, je suis contente. Bonjour à tous d'abord. Je suis contente et ravie de vous rencontrer sur cette plateforme virtuelle qui va mettre la lumière sur ces ravissants oiseaux qui sont les vautours. Donc, par rapport à ma présentation, je vais parler brièvement sur le statut actuel et quelques informations de 2004, 2016 et 2020 sur le vautour de Rüppell en Algérie. Alors, par rapport au statut du Rüppell en Algérie, donc, écoutez, vous êtes en train de passer rapidement les diapos.
Oui, oui.
Voilà, ici, oui, voilà. Alors, sur les 5 espèces de vautours citées dans la littérature en Algérie, le moine, l'oripeau, le fauve, le technoptère d'Égypte et le hypaète barbu, le vautour de Rüppell n'a jamais été mentionné. Passez. Et donc, passez-moi la diapo suivante, s'il vous plaît. Alors, sur le document qui a été édité en 2000 par IUCN et Moali qui présente la synthèse sur les oiseaux d'Algérie, les auteurs présentent une synthèse pour le... on revient... je ne sais pas, il se passe quelque chose. Voilà. Donc, les auteurs présentent une synthèse sur ces 5 vautours que je viens de citer dans la première diapo, mais ils n'ont jamais cité le vautour de Rüppell. Et sur la base, passez s'il vous plaît, et sur la base de ce document, Oiseaux d'Algérie, vous voulez bien passer la diapo?
Oui, c'est bon.
Voilà.
Moi, j'ai passé, mais vous, je pense que vous avez un décalage de 30 secondes.
D'accord. OK. Donc, sur la base du document de Ivenman et Moali, le législateur algérien a intégré les 5 espèces citées dans le décret exécutif numéro 12 de 235 du 24 mai 2012 fixant la liste des espèces animales non domestiques protégées. Et le vautour de Rüppell, malheureusement, ne figure pas dessus. Passez, s'il vous plaît. Diapo suivante.
Oui, c'est bon. Vous avez la prochaine, c'est bon.
Alors, la présence signalée du vautour en Algérie, donc nonobstant l'absence de l'espèce sur la liste des espèces protégées, de fortes présomptions persistent quant à son existence sporadique, plus particulièrement au niveau de la bordure méridionale du Tassili nagère où des échos faisant état de signalement d'individus isolés perçant le contrefort sud du parc culturel du Tassili nagère. Passez, s'il vous plaît. Donc, il y a eu aussi de préciser que l'espèce avait même niché entre 2004 et 2006 au sud de la wilaya de Khanchla et au nord, à l'est, nord-est de l'Algérie. 2 sujets ont été récupérés de cette nichée et ont été ramenés à Batna. L'un d'eux a été déposé aux eaux de Belezma, qui est géré par le parc national de Belezma, et l'autre chez les services vétérinaires qui l'ont pris pour le tester en H1N8. À l'époque, ce jeune vautour, que nous appelons ici Bellezma, a été identifié comme étant un vautour fauve. Ce n'est que quelques années plus tard que Jean-Paul Jacob, lors de sa visite aux zoos, ait rectifié le nom et il est actuellement dans une volière avec un vautour fauve. Passez, s'il vous plaît. On pense donc que Bellezma et le vautour fauve qui est avec lui sont des femelles. Mais ça reste à prouver pour le Rüppell. Le fauve pond un œuf chaque année depuis 3 ans et il garnit son nid par des ossements de sa nourriture. On n'a jamais vu Bellezma, le Rüppell, pondre, mais elle couve les œufs, ou il couve les œufs. Donc ici, on voit quelques photos récentes de la nichée du vautour fauve. Le vautour de Rüppell qui est en train de couver l'œuf du fauve. Et là, au milieu, on voit le Rüppell qui veut attaquer la personne qui est en train de le photographier. Passez, s'il vous plaît. Et dans ce même ordre d'idées, notons l'échouage insoupçonné d'un sujet dans une propriété agricole située au sud-ouest du pays, dans la région d'Adrar, et nous n'avons jamais connu sa provenance. Le propriétaire de la terre agricole a mis ce vautour en vente et sur les pages Facebook. Donc, très tôt, les associations ont intervenu pour récupérer l'oiseau et le remettre aux forestiers de la région. Passez, s'il vous plaît. Et ce sujet-là est actuellement pris en charge sous haute surveillance par les services territoriaux de la Direction générale des forêts, de la protection de la faune et de la flore en vue d'un prochain lâcher. Passez, s'il vous plaît. Donc, dans la diapo suivante, on peut voir ici l'évolution du vautour qu'on appelle Adrar, le vautour qui a échoué à la wilaya d'Adrar. Donc, nous l'avons appelé Adrar. Donc, une évolution depuis sa récupération. Donc, il a été récupéré, dans ce tableau, on expose les paramètres biométriques. Le vautour a été trouvé le 28 novembre 2020 et il pesait 6,250 kg et le 7 mars 2021, il a pesé 6,700 kg. Donc, il a évolué par 400 kg, 500 à peu près. Donc, et l'essentiel, c'est son poids qui a augmenté. Donc là, on peut déjà dire qu'il est assez bien pris en charge dans ce zoo. Diapo suivante, s'il vous plaît. Alors, qu'en est-il pour la taille de la population du vautour de Rüppell en Algérie? Avec une superficie de plus de 2 km², l'Algérie est à la fois le plus grand pays d'Afrique et du monde arabe et du bassin méditerranéen. Il partage plus
2 minutes,
de 6 000...
2 minutes, Afeva.
Oui.
2 minutes, pardon.
Oui. 2 minutes, il me reste,
reste.
D'accord. D'accord. Oui. Donc, il partage des frontières avec la Tunisie, la Libye, le Niger, le Mali et la Mauritanie et le Sahara occidental à l'ouest et enfin le Maroc au nord-ouest. Le manque de prospection, notamment dans les contrées sud du pays, d'une part, et le risque de confusion avec le vautour fauve, d'autre part, corrobore l'insuffisance des observations concernant l'espèce. Donc, la population actuellement reste inconnue pour ces circonstances. Passez, s'il vous plaît. Alors, nous avons présenté dans le slide suivant une carte actuelle que j'ai pu bricoler pour montrer l'étendue de l'Algérie avec les sites où les vautours ont été contactés depuis 2004. Donc, en jaune, c'est les sujets qui ont été en liberté et en rouge, ce sont les sujets actuellement en captivité dans les 2 zoos que j'ai cités. Passez, s'il vous plaît. Donc, on passe à la conclusion. Alors, en conclusion, le réseau Vautour Algérie, qui est en train de prendre forme sous l'impulsion de la Direction générale des forêts, est une excellente initiative devant être soutenue en vue d'aboutir à la mise en place d'un plan d'action épousant la même démarche initiée par le Parc national de Tlemcen concernant le percnoptère d'Égypte. Donc, le plan d'action il a été soutenu par l'ambassade de France pour l'association Forêt Modèle de Tlemcen dans le Parc national de Tlemcen. L'opportunité se présente avec l'existence d'Adrar et de Belezma en captivité pour un projet ambitieux de tentative de reproduction ex situ. Et finalement, je remercie mes collègues, M. Abdelrahmani Saïd, M. Bensassi Mohamed et M. Assam Zerwala. Et merci à vous.
Merci.
Merci pour votre attention. Ouais.
Thank you, Hafeda, for this information about the work is doing in Algeria. Do we have Amina ready?
Oui. Donc, normalement, Elena, c'est elle qui va actionner la communication, s'il vous plaît, Elena.
Ah oui, Elena va partager.
On vous entend très loin, il faut approcher le micro.
Je m'excuse pour la coupure, c'était une coupure totale. Je m'excuse encore.
Pas grave. Essayez d'approcher le micro.
Là, comme ça, vous m'entendez mieux? Voilà.
Mieux, oui.
Donc, après la présentation de ma collègue, Madame, qui vient de présenter juste précédemment, donc j'aurais voulu passer juste avant, c'était pour donner un peu le contexte général et après le détail avec ma collègue qui vient de présenter. Malheureusement, ça ne s'est pas fait dans cet ordre, mais ça ne fait rien. Donc, il y a une présentation générale qui est qu'on a partagé avec le groupe. Et là, c'est un résumé pour essayer justement de nous partager la communication avec ma collègue de Tlemcen. Donc, ici, donc, les données que nous voulons partager avec vous, la page suivante, s'il vous plaît. Donc, c'est un travail qu'on a fait avec moi-même et mon époux qui est aussi responsable au niveau de la Direction générale des forêts. Allez-y. Donc, l'Algérie, c'est un pays continent, donc c'est le plus grand pays d'Afrique actuellement. Et donc, je vous fais ici un petit patchwork des grandes falaises qui existent et où se retrouvent nos grands rapaces, particulièrement les vautours. Donc, de la côte jusqu'au contrefort de nos espaces. Donc, continuez. Donc, voilà. Et là, c'est la dernière image qu'on vient de vous partager. C'est le contexte pour que vous ayez une vue du site où a été retrouvé le dernier vautour de Rüppell. Continuez. Donc, le premier spécimen a été capturé, comme l'a précisé ma collègue, c'était dans les années 2006, en début d'année 2006. Ça, c'est la première photo qui a été retenue. Donc, la même explication. Donc, ça a été confirmé par la suite par M. Jean-Paul Jacob, parce qu'il a été confondu, mais M. Sibachir, qui était ornithologue au niveau de la région, avait vu qu'il y avait quelque chose qui n'était pas conforme avec les vautours fauves qui étaient dans la région. Donc, c'était ça où on a pu confirmer en novembre 2006 que c'était un juvénile de Rüppell. Continuez. Donc, ce spécimen, il est en captivité depuis 2006. Donc, il est arrivé à un stade encore plus élevé. Toujours donc et donc la région, je vais vous présenter tout à l'heure le site où il a été capturé. Bon, allez-y. Donc, vous voyez donc dans la partie nord, si je peux me permettre avec mon curseur, je ne sais pas si vous voyez que mon curseur, ça fonctionne. Donc, la région de Cheshire, donc la région, voilà, très bien, très bien. Donc, la région nord-est du pays, ça fait partie du grand massif de l'Atlas saharien. Donc, c'est une grande barrière qui va de la région de Béchar jusqu'à la région de la Tunisie, donc du Maroc jusqu'à la Tunisie, c'est une grande chaîne de montagnes avec des coupures intermittentes. Et donc, ce sont des zones plutôt semi-arides. Donc, un peu plus, il y a des faciès semi-arides, mais avec des massifs forestiers. Mais là, c'est vraiment semi-aride, mais sans massif forestier. C'est dans ce site-là où a été retrouvé ce premier spécimen, donc en 2006. Continuez. Donc, je vais vous montrer les images du site. Donc, voilà, nous avons essayé d'aller non, juste avant, voilà, nous avons essayé de repérer avec l'image Google pour vous montrer un peu les reliefs qu'il y a dans la région. Vous voyez le point, c'est la région de Cheshire exactement. Continuez. Donc, vous voyez, ce sont des canyons plutôt arides avec des falaises abruptes où il y a très peu d'activités humaines ou de perturbations, à part dans les oasis ou dans les lits d'ouest. Je ne vous ai pas montré dans la photo, mais la perturbation humaine, elle est juste là. Continuez. Donc, voilà les canyons. Et là, le site de la région de Cheshire avec des oueds qui sont porteurs d'eau en période continue et parfois en été aussi en continu parce qu'il y a connexion avec les monts Shelia qui reçoivent aussi de la neige. Continuez. Donc, le deuxième site, donc ça date de 2006 dans le premier site. Le deuxième site d'observation, c'est vraiment dans le Sahara central. Vous voyez, voilà, plus au sud. C'est dans le Sahara central et dans un autre, tout à fait un autre type d'habitat. Vous continuez. Donc, vous voyez, c'est plutôt un paysage ouvert. C'est le sud de l'Arc occidental avec des grands massifs dunaires et avec quelques oasis comme vous voyez ici. Et aussi dans la partie ouest de ce site-là, il y a un grand massif, c'est le plateau de Tedmate, où ce sont comme ça des falaises aussi abruptes, mais vraiment dénudées de vie et d'activités humaines, sauf dans certaines agglomérations ramassées. Continuez. Donc, voilà, je voulais vous montrer dans ce zoom donc, le type d'agriculture qui est en essor dans la partie, sur l'ensemble du territoire, mais en particulier dans les régions du sud de notre pays. Et vous voyez avec la flèche rouge, où j'ai essayé de zoomer un type de bassin où justement cet oiseau a été récupéré par l'agriculteur qui s'est empêtré dans son bassin, sûrement voulant s'abreuver. Et l'agriculteur donc l'a récupéré. Et par la suite, donc c'était un jeune naturaliste de la région de Béchar, M. Redouane Tahri, qui a tout de suite vu la différence. Il a invité à le remettre aux autorités. Continuez. Voilà, donc pour résumer, donc le statut du Rüppell en Algérie, donc il ne figure aucunement dans la liste des espèces mentionnées pour l'Algérie, qu'elles soient accidentelles ou de passage, mais il n'y figure pas du tout. Donc, évidemment, dans la liste non plus des espèces protégées en Algérie. Donc, la sous-espèce, donc, ce serait le Rüppelli. Et donc, son statut serait en voie de clarification, surtout nous avons eu donc, je ne sais pas si ma collègue l'a précisé, donc il y a eu, en fait, quand il y a eu deux oisillons qui ont été récupérés dans la région de Cheshire, donc s'il y a 2 oisillons, ça veut dire qu'il y aurait au moins deux couples. Et donc, il y aurait donc une activité de nidification dans cette région-là. Donc, son statut est à clarifier par la suite. Continuer. Donc, on a parlé aussi d'hybridation naturelle. Notre collègue espagnol en a parlé tout à l'heure. Et nous avons retrouvé des informations sur la littérature qu'il y aurait justement une probabilité d'hybridation naturelle. Et là, justement, avec les collègues du Parc national de Belezma, ils ont eu des informations de nidification, enfin, avec un succès de reproduction entre un vautour fauve et un vautour de Rüppell qui sont captifs dans le même enclos. Donc, il y a eu 2 fois des œufs de pondus, mais sans succès d'éclosion. Donc, il y a eu, enfin, pour ainsi dire, une hybridation, mais sans succès de reproduction, de la suite de la reproduction. Continuez. Donc là, c'est le couple et là, l'œuf qui a été pondu. Donc, il y a eu deux tentatives de ce spécimen, deux œufs de pendu, mais sans éclosion. Et donc, les collègues sont en train de faire le suivi de cette étape-là. Donc, en captivité, apparemment, il peut y avoir une possibilité de réussite en captivité. Donc, pour la discussion générale, donc dans notre document que nous avons présenté, qui figure dans le fichier partagé, nous avons fait le détail des discussions, mais ici, nous avons voulu résumer, vu le manque de temps qui nous harcèle. Donc, la première information qu'on voudrait partager avec vous, donc pour l'implantation, nous supposons donc qu'il y aurait une implantation d'au moins 2 couples de vautours de Rüppell avant l'année 2006. Et donc, comme nous avons lu aussi dans la bibliographie, il faudrait au moins 2 ou 3 années pour que les individus se sentent dans un milieu plutôt favorable pour pouvoir entamer une reproduction. Donc ce serait, il y aurait un début de population dans cette région-là, donc dans la région nord-est du pays. Dans ma présentation précédente, j'ai montré aussi une photographie où dans notre pays, donc nous disposons de 2 grands flyways, donc le flyway ouest qui vient de Gibraltar via le Maroc et une partie de l'Algérie dans la partie ouest, qui descend jusqu'à la région sahélienne. Donc ce serait cette voie-là qu'aurait emprunté le vautour de Rüppell qui a été retrouvé dans la région d'Adrar. Et donc, c'est confirmé par nos collègues marocains et qui nous montrent des mouvements côté ouest avec les vautours qui ont été tagués. Et donc, nous avons aussi en Algérie donc une autre voie, un autre flyway est qui traverse l'Algérie du Nord et la Tunisie par le biais vers la Sicile et l'Italie, et donc qui redescend vers la région sahélienne. Et donc, nous supposons que le spécimen ou cette colonie, nous n'avons pas d'informations s'il y a des mouvements de vautours fauves traversant cette région-là, c'est-à-dire le côté est. Donc, l'information que nous avons, c'est que, et qu'on a retrouvé dans toute la bibliographie, c'est que les vautours de Rüppell immatures fréquentent les vautours fauves, donc ils pourraient les suivre dans leur mouvement de migration. Donc, l'information que nous avons pour le vautour fauve, donc nous avons des populations sédentaires de vautours fauves et à certaines périodes de migration, donc il y a un accroissement, un recrutement, on va dire, de spécimens de vautours fauves qui viennent aussi en migration et qui se déplacent et qui vont d'est en ouest et qui vont du nord vers le sud. Donc, en Algérie, la population de vautours fauves sédentaires, elle est localisée dans la frange nord. Donc, sa limite, c'est dans la place de la côte jusqu'à la place saharienne. Vous trouverez cette information dans la communication qui est un peu plus détaillée. Donc, pour les menaces, donc, comme c'est connu pour la majorité des pays, en général, c'est les types d'empoisonnement qui sont utilisés dans la chaîne trophique. Mais dans notre pays, cette voie-là n'est pas du tout validée parce qu'on n'utilise pas du tout d'empoisonnement à l'échelle locale ou nationale. Les risques d'électrocution, ils existent effectivement, mais ce n'est pas vraiment à grande échelle comme ça a été montré par nos collègues au niveau de nos collègues marocains. Des ventes de spécimens sur les marchés locaux, ça peut exister, mais à titre occasionnel, c'est-à-dire comme des captures comme ça occasionnelles, mais sans plus. Il n'y a pas vraiment un marché lié spécifiquement au vautour ou en particulier. Allez-y. Allez-y. Voilà, donc voilà, j'ai essayé de résumer, de faire le résumé du résumé. Et les discussions sont ouvertes et vous aurez les détails de notre communication à moi-même et à monsieur Giardini dans le partage du document de l'IUCN. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Amina.
Thanks, Amina. Thanks for completing this picture of the situation in Argentina. Now that we have covered all the distribution range for this species, we are now to complete the scenario by adding a new actor to the equation, because Alejandro Rubia, project coordinator of Migres Foundation, will talk us about the role of Griffon vulture as a possible proxy for the presence of this species in North Africa and Europe. So over to you, Alejandro, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Is okay, the presentation is open?
Yes, solo ponla en modo presentación.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this interesting symposium. And my camera is broken and I can not show you my image, and I put a picture of mine. Is the right side, the bottom right side of the slide. It's not the center one. I am not able to fly till the moment. And in this presentation, I would like to introduce this topic. The title is Grief on Vulture, the proxy for the presence of Rüppell's vulture in North Africa and Europe, including some lessons from the Strait of Gibraltar. And the idea is to discuss about the process of colonization of Rüppell's vulture and the occurrence in the Western Palearctic in north of Africa and Southern Europe, and discuss the relationship of this colonization and occurrence with the grief on vultures migratory movements between Africa and Europe. And as previous speakers said, Rüppell's vulture is a critically endangered species suffering a sharp decline in Africa. But in this context, it's a paradox that the species is also colonizing the south of Europe and north of Africa. And in this presentation, I would like to discuss why and how declining a species shows a colonizing process outside its former distribution. And I will talk about the colonization process and the hypothesis to explain it. I also talk about some information and lessons from the Strait of Gibraltar, that is a place that is a hot spot for migration of vultures, with concluding remarks at the end of the presentation. The species, the Rüppell's vulture, is colonizing or starting to colonize the Western Palearctic. And in a previous study, we review a huge amount of ornithological literature, and also we consult the database of very popular citizen science platforms as eBird and Observados, and we got thousands of records of Rüppell's vulture. And we can see in these maps showing the situation, the records of the Rüppell's vulture in Western Palearctic in different decades, in 1990s, in 2000s and 2010s. And also in the graphs below, you can see the trends in the records of Rüppell's vulture in different countries of the Western Palearctic. And we can see that there are no records of the species before 1970s. The first record occurred in Morocco at the end of 1970s, and later in the Iberian Peninsula in 1990s. But there is an increasing records of Rüppell's vulture since 2008, especially in the last 5 years. Most of these records involve juveniles or immature individuals. And in the last years, we have recorded breeding attempts for this species in the Western Palearctic. And you can see in the maps that is in the right side of the slide, the location of these adults in the breeding period, and in green points, you can see the position of the breeding attempts or the successful attempts in the case of Algeria. And why this, to explain this colonization process, was proposed that was linked or related with the Griffon Vulture movements, and I named this process as the Griffon Vulture conveyor belt. It's like a luggage belt in the airports. The movement of thousands of Griffon Vultures between Europe and Africa could be the cause of this new process of colonization. But the question of this process, one interesting question is, why now? Because the Rüppell's vulture was very more abundant in the past, and why in the last 30 years or 20 years, the Rüppell's vultures start to colonize the north, despite this suffering sharp declines in their former distribution. Why is occurring in the last years? And also, if this explanation is this hypothesis is correct, why is not affecting other species of African vultures? Why only the Rüppell's vulture is affected by this colonization process? Some details of the species to understand the process. Both are very large raptors. The Griffon vulture is a bit bigger than the Rüppell's vulture. Rüppell's vulture is smaller. Griffon vulture is distributed along southern Eurasia. The adults are mostly residents, but a high proportion of juveniles are migratory, are migrants, and move to Africa. On the opposite, the Rüppell's vulture, the distribution is an African distribution, located in the Sahel belt, in the savannas of the Sahel. Also, the adults are residents, and the juveniles made nomadic movements. And there, in this case, it's very important the effect of extreme events, weather events, as droughts in the Sahel zone that provoke extensive movements of these birds. And both species are very, very gregarious, both in migration, both during the feeding period or during the breeding season. About Griffon vultures movements, we have evidence from ringing recoveries. Birds ringed in the Iberian Peninsula produce a lot of recoveries in Africa. In recent years, also we have information from Griffon vultures marked with GPS or satellite transmitters, and we can see that these birds cross the Sahara and reach the Sahel zone, and in both in the western route and through the Iberian Peninsula, through the Strait of Gibraltar, but also in the eastern route from the Balkans and cross to Middle East to Eastern Africa. And in the map below, you can see a reconstruction of the main flyways of Griffon vultures. The Griffon vultures, especially juveniles, move to the south during dispersion period and reach the Sahel belt. And also in this map, you can see the numbers of the breeding populations in different countries of Europe. And you can see that the Iberian Peninsula in this moment keep a very important Griffon vulture population, probably is one of the bigger in the world for vultures. And this is very important to understand the process for the Rüppells. While most of adults are residents, mostly residents, a high proportion of the Iberian juveniles, at the beginning, different authors said that perhaps 30% of juveniles migrate to Africa, but it's possible that this proportion is higher. And these juveniles reach the Sahel belt in Africa and spend a period there, 1 year or more, And when they are close to maturity, sexual maturity, they return to northern breeding areas in Europe. But this return to Europe match with the Rüppell's Vulture fledging and dispersal period, and probably attract some of these juveniles during migration.
Three minutes, Alejandro.
Yeah, in the Sahel, the vultures form a very rich community with 7, 8, 9 different species. More are very gregarious and share the same thermals, roosting and feeding places, and establish very complex relationships of dominance. That is a very important point because these dominance relationships are related with size of the species and numbers. The vultures follow the leader, follow the bigger, or follow the crowd. And this is very important for understand the process. And also in Africa, they are suffering a sharp decline in the last decades. In the Strait of Gibraltar, there is a very important migration point for vultures with high concentrations of Rüppell's Vulture records, and there is also a monitoring raptor program with standardized protocols, with constant effort protocols, and the information that we get is very important. What we obtain in the Strait of Gibraltar, one point important is the magnitude of vultures passage through Gibraltar. Considering only Rüppell's Vulture, we have more or less an annual rate of 20 to 90 different Rüppell's Vulture crossing to Africa, with average of 47 individuals per year, but these numbers are higher in the last decade. And in previous studies about the spring migration, we estimate that 0.5% of vultures arriving to Iberian Peninsula were identified as Rüppell's Vulture in the groups of Rüppell's, in the Griffon vultures. Also, through the Strait of Gibraltar, cross every year between 6,000 to 13,000 of Griffon vultures to Africa or returning to Europe. And it's possible, considering these estimations, that around 40 to 70 Rüppell's Vulture reach the Iberian Peninsula each spring migration. Part of these Rüppell's Vulture return to Africa, but some not. We are not sure what is the process. Perhaps some of them establish the territory, the breeding areas there, or perhaps they are not able to cross the strait because of the weather, and finally decide to stay up on Europe. When we compare the phenology of the vultures passage in Gibraltar, you can see the graphs of Rüppell's Vulture passage in Gibraltar and the Griffon Vulture passage phenology. Both phenologies, both time schedules are very coincidence, and this is one important point because Rüppell's Vulture cross the strait, cross in spring, cross in autumn, have a regular pattern, and this pattern is show a coincidence with the Griffon Vulture migration. And also it's important that more than 65–80% of records of Rüppell's Vulture are linked with Griffon Vulture's flocks or groups that cross the strait. And also it's interesting to see the trends in the crossings, and you can see that the numbers of Rüppell's Vulture crossing the strait. This graph is during the autumn. And these numbers are increasing with an annual growth of a rate of 22%, and the numbers are higher since 2007. Most of vultures are immatures or juveniles, but also interesting is that there are some records of white-back vulture and hooded vulture. And about the question if is the Griffon Vulture the proxy of the presence of in Africa and Europe, it's interesting to consider that the interspecific relationships between both species, that both species share the same areas in the Sahel belt in the Western Africa, and same they use thermals and roosting places and feeding areas. It's interesting to understand that both species show different population trends, because the Griffon Vulture is increasing the population in Europe, while most of the African vultures are declining. And this happened in the last 4 decades. You can see in the graphs on the right side, the trend in the Griffon Vulture population in Spain, the trend in the Griffon Vultures crossing the Strait of Gibraltar, and also the trends in the Rüppell's Vulture records in Western Palearctic. The key question is that while the Griffon Vulture is increasing the population in Europe and the numbers that cross to Africa, the Rüppell's Vulture population in Africa is decreasing. And this means that the proportion of vultures in Africa is changing. The Griffon Vultures is more abundant now, and the Rüppell's Vulture is less abundant now. And probably this produce attraction effects for Rüppell's, for juvenile Rüppell's Vulture that follows these massive movements of Griffon Vultures. The phenology is very interesting because the migration of both species is a mirror of them. And the return occurs at the end of the dry season, when most of Rüppell's Vulture fledge and start to disperse. And some of these juveniles and matures are integrating mixed flocks. There is one interesting question about the effect of dogs in Sahel. We don't understand exactly if this affecting also this process of colonization. How is the Rüppell's Vulture colonizing Europe, and how is the relationship with the dogs in Sahel? But the result is that there is an increasing number of Rüppell's Vulture in Western Palearctic. Some remarks about this is that we are living an earlier stage of colonization process of Rüppell's Vultures in the Western Palearctic, in Europe with some, and Northern Africa with some breeding attempts. This process is linked with the increase of Griffon Vultures populations in Western Europe, and the subsequent increase of individuals migrating to Africa, and the decrease of Rüppell's Vulture population in Africa. And this opened a new conservation scenario and opportunities for Rüppell's Vulture. And finally, I would like to acknowledge and to say thanks to the regional government of Andalusia for the commission of the project diagnosis and status of Rüppell's Vulture in Andalusia. Also, my colleagues of the Migress team that are also authors of this report. And also, I would like to thank all observers and contributors to eBird and Observado platforms, very useful for this kind of studies, and to all volunteers of the Migress program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandro, for this interesting presentation. The more presentation we watch here, the more interesting questions that we realize there is about this species. We are now having a set of questions and answers. So over to you, Elena. We are a bit delayed, but have at least 5 minutes to solve some of the questions. Elena.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. We had 2 questions that were made before. Mariek van Ruik, sorry for that, was asking if there are possibilities to release vultures born in a zoo out in the wild. So I guess this is for any of the panelists. who want to answer.
Here we go. Yes, of course it is, Elena. Actually, we do it on a daily basis with, for example, with the bearded vulture. I know the bearded vulture is more an eagle than a vulture, proper vulture itself. But yes, it is possible. The key point is that's depending on how we do it. If we do it according to the good practice, no problem at all. If we do it in the wrong way, it is a huge problem. So we wouldn't be able to do it. But if we do it right, yes, of course it is. No problem.
Je peux faire un commentaire?
Oui.
Donc, la question se pose pour notre part où les deux spécimens sont en captivité. Mais la problématique qu'on a dans notre pays, c'est que les programmes de mise en place d'oiseaux avec des balises, c'est-à-dire que c'est une longue procédure à mettre en place. Donc, l'idéal, bien sûr, ce serait de relâcher ces spécimens dans un cadre organisé, dans un plan d'action, mais ça sera, on va dire, à moyen terme. Dans l'action à court terme, pour le moment, ces spécimens restent en captivité jusqu'à avoir une vision plus claire sur un éventuel plan d'action comme ça régional ou quelque chose dans ce genre. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Any other?
Well, if the birds are already sexually imprinted, I don't think they are good candidates for release. But in that case, in case they are imprinted with humans, well, what I would rather do is to keep them to build up a breeder stock for captive breeding. That might be a good idea. And I'll tell you that because if you release them while imprinted, the chances for them to join the breeding, the wild population, chances are really slow. So probably we will waste these individuals who I think they are really valuable.
Thank you. We can pass to the second question. Álvaro Camilla was asking if is there a picture of the free bird movements south in Mauritania and Mali or even farther to show here and better understand these movements. I don't know if this question was for
that question is to Rachid.
Rashid, please. Do you want me to repeat it? Rashid, are you talking? Est-ce que tu parles? On ne t'entend pas.
Oui, j'ai le micro, je n'ai pas entendu bien la question.
Oui. Is there a picture of the three bird movements south in Mauritania and Mali or even farther?
Oui, normalement, on a des images. On parle des trajets captés par les GPS ou bien les satellites. Oui, effectivement, on a ces trajets enregistrés sur une base de données. Normalement, on est en train de travailler sur un article plus détaillé sur ce passage, ces migrations en dirait de Vulture de Rüppell qu'on a marqué avec des balises GPS. Et une fois ils sont publiés, on peut le partager avec nos collègues algériens avec plaisir.
Merci. Thank you. I don't know if it's clear. If not, you can always write again in the chat. In the question and answers section. There is a last question from Justo Martin. Une prospection est prévue en Algérie pour rechercher des éventuels couples reproducteurs de Rüppell's Vulture dans les colonies de vautours fauves connues. Donc, Amina wanted to
comment. Si je peux me permettre, donc effectivement, donc la première information qui nous saute aux yeux, donc c'est tout à fait de reconsidérer toutes nos colonies qui sont sédentaires connues dans notre pays. Il faut les revoir maintenant avec un nouvel œil. C'est-à-dire pour nous, c'était des vautours fauves considérés comme une masse. Et là, avec les ornithologues, donc nous allons faire passer le message de reconsidérer déjà les populations, les colonies sédentaires dont nous avons la connaissance, de revoir déjà, de revérifier de visu spécimen par spécimen. Et la recommandation aussi qu'on avait aussi retenue, c'était d'aller revisiter vraiment avec un œil plus assidu la région de Cherchar, là où il y a eu la première, les 2 individus qui ont été récupérés. Il y a eu déjà une première prospection à ce moment-là par 3 de nos collègues des universitaires de l'université de Batna, d'Atarf et de Biskra, mais sans succès. Et là, il faudrait refocaliser dans cette région-là s'il y aurait encore quelque chose. Voilà. Je laisse la parole à ma collègue.
Merci. Et vous avez aussi laissé des commentaires dans les questions and answers.
Tout à fait.
Merci. Hafeda, vous voulez commenter?
Oui, un petit commentaire seulement. Donc, réellement, l'administration n'a pas fait de réelle prospection concernant le vautour de Rüppell, parce qu'on a toujours considéré qu'il n'a pas existé, sauf ces quelques observations qu'on a partagées avec vous. Donc, actuellement, on est en train de relancer avec la Direction générale des forêts un réseau vautour qui est sous la coupe du réseau ornitho-algérien. Mais pour réellement, on est aussi en réseau avec beaucoup de photographes naturalistes qui s'intéressent aux oiseaux, et on est en contact continu à la recherche de nouveaux rapaces tels que le gypaète barbu ou autres. Et jusqu'à présent, aucun des groupes n'a encore photographié le Rüppell. Donc, toutes les colonies ou bien les photos qui ont été diffusées ou communiquées entre nous sur les vautours démontrent qu'il n'y a encore que le vautour dans les populations.
Mais je crois que ça coupe. I think it's freeze.
Population algérienne sédentaire qui n'y a encore que l'intervention de Anna.
Merci, Afeda. Ça coupe un peu, mais c'est bon, merci.
Oh, ça coupe, d'accord.
Ouais, non, mais je crois qu'on a plus ou moins eu l'idée.
Okay.
Sinon, vous avez aussi laissé les commentaires dans la section. Merci. C'est bon. We don't have any other question for now, so I think we can pass to the last set of.
Elena, je peux intervenir?
Oui, brièvement, 1 minute.
Pardon?
1 minute.
Ah, ok, no problem. Donc, on continue.
Oui, on ne vous entend pas. Non, on n'entend pas. Well, we will go back to you later, okay? We come to Jose.
No, Elena, thanks. We have a comment, a raised hand from Mohamed Amesiana. So I'm going to give you the floor, Mohamed, but you only have 1 minute, please. Please be. Oh no, they don't. Okay, Mohamed, please write your question and we will try to answer after this block of presentations. Thanks. Okay, we have listened a lot about the distribution, ecology, behavior.
We have I think it's a question that Mohammed wrote. We will go back to that later. Thank you.
Okay.
If we have time, otherwise we will always have.
Yeah, we are a bit delayed, so yeah. I'm telling that we have a good cover of information about the status, the distribution, but now we are looking for hear something about what's the current conservation actions and what we need to do to improve the situation of this species. And for doing now, we have Jose Tavares from Vulture Conservation Foundation and one of our partners in the Safe Flyways project, who will talk about about the threats and conservation actions on vultures in the Mediterranean region. So over to you, Jose. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for staying to listen to this until the end. Can you confirm that you can see my screen? Yes, okay, thank you. Well, hello, well, good afternoon already here from a very snowy and cold Ankara in Turkey. Spring has definitely not yet arrived here. This was the scene in the street, in my street this morning. What I would like to talk is about really, we've talked that Rüppell's vultures are recent newcomers to Europe. What are they finding in Europe? What will they find in Europe? What's the conservation scene in Europe? What's the situation with vultures in Europe in general in a very short time? We've also heard from André Botta this morning that vultures in Africa generally are not doing very well. Same situation in Asia. The situation in Africa and Asia is indeed very dire for vultures. In Asia because of veterinary diclofenac. In Africa because of a widespread poisoning crisis that is actually making most of the species be on the border of extinction. On the contrary, the situation in Europe is very, very positive. The 4 species, soon to be or already 5th species of vultures, are actually doing extremely well in Europe, in most of Europe. We will see that there is a little bit of an asymmetry within the European continent. So most species are actually increasing or have increased significantly in Europe. They have recolonized either naturally or through restocking and reintroductions their European range. And vultures in Europe are indeed a rare example of conservation optimism of a group of species that have turned the page and are doing now very well after a bad period in the recent history. Indeed, they are at the center of a wonderful conservation story, at the center of a rewilding program that is capturing the imagination of many people in Europe and is becoming an example that can be replicated in other parts of the world. As I mentioned, the picture is not symmetrical. This recovery is mostly happening in Western Europe, so Portugal, Spain, France, where the increase has been spectacular. We are talking about increases of griffon vulture, cinereous vulture, bird-eared vulture in the order of 500 to 1,000% in the last 30 years. Cinereous vulture have increased from 250 pairs to 3,000 pairs. Griffon vulture from 5,000 pairs to 30,000 pairs in Western Europe. We are now starting to see a similar picture, but at a much lower and slow rate in Eastern Europe, in the Balkans, where vultures either disappeared or became very depleted. Just to give you an idea, the population of griffon vultures in the whole of the Balkans is only 1,000 pairs compared with over 35,000 pairs in Western Europe. But we are now starting to see them stabilized or even increasing in Eastern Europe. Only the Egyptian vulture, which is more or less stable in Western Europe, is still declining fast in Eastern Europe and in the Balkans. This increase of the griffon vultures in the Balkans will actually be very interesting for the Rüppell's vulture, because they also migrate to the Sahel, but they migrate through the Eastern Mediterranean, where and maybe there they will also mix with Rüppell's vultures that live in the northeast corner of Africa, and maybe with the increase of the populations of the griffon vultures, we will see the same effect that Alejandro just mentioned, the conveyor belt. So this will actually be a very good testing ground for the hypothesis that Alejandro presented in the last presentation, which is very likely and which is supported by very good data. Even though vultures are doing extremely well in Europe, obviously some of them do die, and it is important to know why they are dying, because only by mitigating the threats, this mortality, we have actually achieved to turn the page and to be so successful in their conservation. Fortunately, we've got very good data about what kills vultures in Europe. And we've got very good data that actually allows us for continental-wide mortality analysis, as well as regional or local analysis. I think a good element or a good basis for this, for these data sets is actually a vulture mortality database that the VCF has established for the whole of the Mediterranean region, not only Europe, but this also includes North Africa. And we've already compiled a large, group of data. We've got in this database over 7,000 or close to 7,000 records from 20 countries of known exact and detailed mortality cases for vultures. Of course, most of it is griffon vultures, but quite a few hundreds of the other 3 species. We don't have in this database yet any mortality for Rüppell's vulture. And I was very interested to listen to the presentation by Rashid with some of the data that came from the tagging this year. And we are very much looking forward to include that data in our vulture mortality database. From the mortality database, it is clear that in Europe, the main causes of mortality are poisoning and collisions and electrocutions. I come back to this in a minute. This vulture mortality database is allowing us to start doing studies and analysis of patterns of vulture mortality across Europe. And for some species which we have got very good data, like in this graph, which shows actually the data that we have for birded vulture, these analyses are actually underpinning conservation action and informing quite a lot of our conservation and introduction projects. We are quite sure about our prioritizing in terms of mitigating threats, because in 2017 we've also concluded this very large piece of work which was called the Vulture Multi-Species Action Plan, and the VCF coordinated the European part. We've conducted either through questionnaires or in a workshop, we've contacted and worked with hundreds of experts that gave us their data that allowed us to prioritize the relative importance of the threats affecting vultures in Europe. And really the message here is that there is really three main types of threats or issues that affect vultures in Europe, and therefore the Rüppell's vulture when it eventually establishes in Europe. If you solve these 3 things, then vulture populations will respond very well and thrive. Poisoning, collision, either electrocution or collision with wind farms, and the whole issue of food. A couple of minutes in each one of these threats. Poison is really the major threat to vultures worldwide and in Europe. It still kills hundreds of vultures in Europe. You know that poison is not intended to vultures. Vultures are collateral victims of poison baits that are mostly put against carnivores that kill either livestock or game species, hunting species. But vultures descend upon these poison baits, they eat them, and then they die. It has been massive, and it had a massive impact. These are figures for Spain for a period of 15 years, thousands of vultures dead through poisoning. Fortunately, the situation in Spain has improved. Up until recently, the poisoning was still killing lots of vultures simply because authorities, enforcement agencies, and government, regional governments didn't take it seriously. It is an environmental crime, but it was ignored. And while most other crimes are mostly solved by the police, poisoning was not, wildlife poisoning was not. This is changing because the attitude of government agencies and the regional governments has changed in Spain. In fact, Spain and several regional governments in Spain, and Andalusia in particular, and our colleagues from Andalusia are here, are really the champions, the world champions in fighting this most important threat to vultures worldwide. And they took it seriously by establishing, dog units, by actually checking cases, by working with the police and with the judiciary. And as a result, the number of poisoning cases in Spain has been decreasing. No surprise then that Spain today harbors 90% of Europe's vultures. This is not the only reason, but it is one of the main reasons why the populations of vultures are doing so well in Spain when compared with
3 minutes,
with other countries. Yes. We are trying to replicate this now in other places, in the Balkans. And we've got a major life project called the Balkan Life Detox Project, where we are actually doing a situation analysis of poisoning in the Balkans. We are establishing working groups with the national governments and producing action plans to tackle this. And an essential part of these action plans involves communication campaigns to specific stakeholders, establishment of anti-poison dog units, but crucially, training and empowerment of government agencies. And here again, the Spanish example and Spanish trainers are essential for this. Regarding collision and electrocution, very simple. It is a huge problem for notably griffon vultures and therefore also for Rüppell's vultures. Very simple solution for electrocution. In our projects with electricity companies, we are actually installing these insulators that minimize electrocution. Collision is a little bit more complicated. Birded vulture in particular dies a lot because of collision. There are solutions, again, these bird markers that you can put on bird lines to mitigate the threat of collision. There is one type of collision in particular that is very difficult to solve, is collision against wind farms. There's again some solutions, notably shut down on demand in some cases, but mostly it is a case of proper planning of the location of the wind farms through the production of risk sensitivity maps and engaging with the industry. And then finally, last couple of minutes, food extremely important for vultures. Where you have plenty of food, you have plenty of vultures. And in fact, Spain has got lots of vultures simply because it has got a lot of food. Food was once upon a time extremely scarce in Europe because of the mad cow disease, which obliged all European countries to incinerate dead carcasses. Fortunately, the European Union in 2011 passed some legislation that allows for supplementary feeding stations and mostly the abandonment of some type of animal subproducts or animal carcasses in the field. Spain adopted that, and because Spain adopted that, there is plenty of food in Spain. This is a graph showing the number of supplementary feeding sites in Spain. As you can see, there are hundreds of supplementary feeding sites in Spain. Over 3 million kilos of food put in supplementary feeding sites. The number of supplementary feeding sites is decreasing because actually the number of farms where abandonment is practiced is increasing fast in Spain. Over 13,000 farms now qualify for this partial abandonment of food. There is now more food being available for vultures in these farms, over 4 million kilos annually than in supplementary feeding sites, and therefore it is food is available. It's available for the griffon vultures, for cinereous vultures, for birded vultures, but also for Rüppell's vultures. And this also explains probably why once they arrive to Europe, they stay because they've got relatively little threats and quite a lot of food. As you can see, most of Spain has got now these farms where this abandonment is practiced, unlike Portugal, and therefore vultures almost don't go to Portugal. There looks like almost an invisible barrier on the border between them, simply because in Portugal carcasses are still collected and incinerated, while in Spain they are available for vultures. That's really it. Main messages. Europe is really the land of vultures these days. We have got a lot of know-how and expertise. There's been a significant increase of vultures in Western Europe. This is now picking up in Eastern Europe, and we will probably see the same thing happening in Eastern Europe. That's where we are actually focusing quite a lot of our conservation actions. And I'm hoping to see more of Rüppell's vultures observations in Eastern Europe, mimicking what has happened in Western Europe, in Portugal and Spain. And it is absolutely essential if we are to save the European vultures, including the Rüppell's vulture, and to create the conditions for a thriving Rüppell's vulture population when it eventually establishes in Europe. It's essential to keep mitigating the threats, to keep fighting the threats, so that this wonderful conservation story can continue and we can gain a fifth vulture species. That's all. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions when they come.
Thank you, Jose, for these comprehensive presentations on the efforts for conservation. It's clear that we need more and more work and to extend this experience to the rest of the areas of the distribution range for many vultures. Don't forget to write the questions and answers for this set of presentations in the question and answer box. We are having a last presentation where our colleague Jose Rafael Garrido from the Spanish regional government of Andalusia will try to go back to answer the questions that for the reason for what we organize this symposium, and is if the Mediterranean region is keeping the global conservation of these species. So over to you, Jose.
Okay. Hi again, Jose. Jose only call me so my mother, JR. Okay. And can you see the presentation, please?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay, after that interesting presentation by everybody, I want first to tell thank you very much for all your efforts for the vultures in your organization and your countries. And now it's time for a summary. And the key question is the Mediterranean region key for the global conservation of the Rüppell's vulture? And obviously, should we get involved in trying to conserve a breeding population in both sides of the Mediterranean? That is the question, and this is the key. Okay, let us recap. The current facts are: there is a population increase in Spain and Morocco. There are breeding individuals in Andalusia and Algeria, with probably reproduction in Algeria, but perhaps they are interbreeding with different vultures. It is necessary to survey, to confirm the situation in Algeria through monitoring. And it is obvious that there is currently an extinction process ongoing in traditional breeding routes at Sahel. So these new areas are important to the conservation of all the species. Okay, in order to decide if we need to take conservation actions, the first thing we need to understand is why the vultures are arriving. It's clear that they are arriving with immature griffon vultures coming back from wintering in the Sahel. It is almost sure that the Moroccan and Iberian Rüppell vultures come from Senegal, Gambia, and Mali. But what about the Algerian Rüppell vultures? Are they coming from the same places, or maybe Niger? And why are they coming? The decline in the Sahel seems to be due to the man-made factors such as habitat change and direct persecution by poisoning, maybe poisoning with diclofenac, with veterinary drugs, or, sorry, it may also be due to factors related to climate change. This may lead to the escape of more and more individuals due to the decline of wild ungulates in the Sahel, whereas in the Mediterranean, there may be more favorable climate conditions and a major availability of food because livestock. So, are we talking about a colonization process or a displacement of population from the Sahel to the Mediterranean region? Are they sustainable populations, or are they individuals destined to disappear due to genetic interbreeding with griffon vulture? And so we get involved in promoting and conserving a breeding population in Andalusia and North Africa. It's clear that we have more questions than answers, but given that the situation of the species in the Sahel is critical, isn't there an international responsibility in favoring the likelihood of conserving a new area for this species? That's us the key questions. What can we do from here on? The first step has been to recognize its presence, irregular presence in Andalusia and North Africa, in order to preserve it. So it has been assessed or listed as critically endangered in North Africa and included in the Vulture Conservation Program of Andalusia. We think that it is necessary that a working group of local and international experts and managers, in other words, focusing on the conservation of Rüppell vultures in Mediterranean regions, should be created to try to answer these questions and to work for its conservation. Obviously, we will not be able to move forward without the monitoring of the species, identifying and monitoring breeding population of Rüppell vultures in Algeria, but also breeding population of griffon vultures in Andalusia and Algeria, and possibly in Morocco in a near future, to determine if there are interbreeding events between the two species, and if that is an important problem of conservation. It is also very important to tag with GPS lawyers Rüppell vultures in Spain, in Morocco, in Algeria, but also in Sahel, to know origin of all Mediterranean Rüppell vultures. But not only to that, also GPS lawyers can tell us what are the threats of the species. Should we elaborate an action plan to promote the settlement of Rüppell vultures in the region? What do you think? And finally, we decided that we do need to get involved in this preservation of the species in the Mediterranean, then we need to look at sources of funding for this. Obviously, as I told before, we have so many so many questions and some little answers. We need to work together to solve this exciting venture of the Rüppell Vulture situation in the Mediterranean. Thank you very much for your attendance and for the good work you are making. And in the next time, I hope to see you soon in person, in the field, maybe looking for Rüppell vultures or other raptors in the field. Thank you very much, my friends. Goodbye, and very luck with the pandemic and your work conserving raptors and especially Rüppell vultures. Okay, if you have any questions, please.
Thanks, JR. Now we have a quick time for questions, if there is any. Elena?
Yeah, I think we have one or two left. So for the diclofenac, I think Jose already answered. If you want to comment on that, otherwise it's in the question and answer. Amina was asking if there are any lessons from the RSPB programs in India related to the poisoning of vultures in that area. Also, I guess for, I don't know for whom.
Jose, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, so in India, vultures mostly died because of veterinary diclofenac. Peter Mandy has asked the question, what's the situation with veterinary diclofenac in Europe? And I replied in the comments, basically, even though it is legally available, and this was a shock to us, we don't have any evidence of any direct mortality of vultures in Europe yet because of veterinary diclofenac. The European Union has obliged or has established some rules to use veterinary diclofenac in Europe, and these rules up until the moment seem to be working in the sense that they seem to be preventing veterinary diclofenac from entering the vulture food chain. The situation in India is completely different, and in Africa would be probably completely different, and veterinary diclofenac can indeed be a significant risk for vultures in some parts of the world. It does not seem to be at the moment so in Europe. We are still looking for that evidence, and should that evidence in Europe appear, we will of course then work with the European Union towards its eventual ban. In India, though, there are still in Africa, there are also cases of poisoning with poison baits, notably in Northeast India, in Assam, where very often dozens of vultures are killed with the same type of modus operandi and situation as we find in Europe or we find in Africa, trying to get rid of predators. But yeah, so the situation with veterinary diclofenac is very particular in South Asia due to the cultural and livestock management systems that you have there, and that are quite unique as compared with Europe.
Thank you, Jose. Rosa Martinez was asking to Andre Bota, but he's not here. Maybe someone can ask if you know, I don't know, otherwise we'll send the question by email. If there are records of the species in Angola.
I don't know.
We don't know. We will ask to Andre. Mohamed wanted to talk. I think you can now, Mohamed Amesian. You have to unmute yourself. And you can talk now, please, briefly.
Okay, thanks. Thanks all for presentation. This is my small reflection of what we know about species in the Mediterranean. many Rüppell's vultures are dying in this region from different causes. We have evidence from in Morocco and a few in Spain. Well, the second point is hybridization with the griffon vulture can be considered more as a problem for the Rüppell's vulture than an opportunity, because obviously in Spain or in northern Algeria, where there is the resident vulture are more numerous, so they the Rüppell vulture are more far fewer. That problem is deletion of the Rüppell's vulture, so it's more a problem. So I think from these 2 points, the mortality and hybridization. So I think that the most important action we can do for the Rüppell's vulture is to limit mortality in this region. I think that's the most important action we can do, and it will benefit, of course, the other scavenger vultures. So a holistic approach that will include resident vulture as well as visiting vultures from sub-Saharan Africa, Rüppells and white-backed vultures will obviously benefit if there is less mortality from different sources in the Mediterranean region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, for that reflection. Peter Mundi was saying that there is no in Angola. Now we know. Maybe if you want, we can give the floor to the panelists if they want to add the final reflections, just one sentence, or if they want to comment on what has been said as last reflection. Yes, Inigo?
Okay, here we go. I'd just like to comment that we have good records of vultures Rüppell mortality in Andalusia. We have collisions with wind farms. We have some of them poisoned and some of them electrocuted. In fact, it is interesting to note that the mortality rate for the chances to find dead Rüppells are higher than the mortality rates for other local or native species. But I think that's normal because these birds, these individuals are supposed to arrive after a long migration. So I think these individuals might be just more vulnerable after an strenuous exercise and after the long migration, the travel. But it is a fact that we find the rate of dead birds of this species is higher than for the others. We have some interesting data, and this information is available for the VCF or whoever who ask for them, require them, no problem, of course.
Thank you, Inigo. It will be indeed very, very nice to compare the relative mortality with, of course, the much larger data set that we have for the griffon vulture to try to actually get those patterns that you've just mentioned. That will be very, very interesting, and will be very interesting also for the conservation planning for the future. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Je ne sais pas si Loari voulait ajouter quelque chose parce que vous n'avez pas pu parler avant. Si vous voulez ajouter quoi que ce soit, sinon on laisse la parole à qui veut. See if someone wants to add something, just maybe raise your hand and we can see you.
Elena, if I might, so thinking a little bit about the future. So this is an evolving process. Obviously, the bulk of the population of Rüppell's vulture is still in Africa, and that's where really most of the species-specific conservation efforts for the Rüppell's vulture should be taken if we are to revert the global status of the species. We cannot think that this will take time, even if the species start to breed in Europe, and we cannot think that with the 5, 10, 15, 20 pairs that we may have in Europe, increasing pairs, we will change the global status of the population. So I think we have to be absolutely aware that the global status of the population will depend on what is happening in Africa. And therefore, for these species, conservation actions should be mostly directed to countries in Africa and to the range in Africa. As far as the colonization and the expansion to Europe, I think there are really two priorities. I mean, as I mentioned, the conservation situation in Europe is globally positive, and efforts that are being applied for the 4 European species will benefit Rüppels as well. So Rüppels will benefit. There are two specific actions, though, that I think would be very important. One of them is really concentrated in North Africa, in Morocco and in Algeria. And it is really important to survey and determine the eventual breeding colonies there, because these are stepping stones. This can be actually quite important for the future corridor or expansion of the population into Europe. So knowing where they are, what is happening, if they are doing so what we've already talked about, the surveys in Algeria, and finding more data about Morocco. So the continuation of the project that Rashid talked about capturing and tagging birds in Morocco, very, very important. And then the second aspect that we can do in Europe is actually to tag birds in Europe as well. So if people are capturing griffon vultures and if people are capturing Rüppell's vultures, it would be very, very interesting. And this would require minimal effort and minimal funding. Would be very, very important to put some tags on these individuals to find out if they are sedentary, if they go back to Africa, if they are actually breeding. As I mentioned, the mortality of vultures in Europe is relatively low. So the likelihood of these immatures or young birds, because we are talking about mostly immatures or young birds in Europe, reaching adulthood, a mature breeding age, is relatively high, because the mortality of vultures in Europe is relatively limited, and therefore it will be interesting to see if they are breeding, if they are hybridizing, and so on. So I think in terms of priorities for Rüppell's vulture, Africa continues to be, has always been and continues to be, the populations there. So, Violetta's stock and the colonies there in Mali, in Niger, in Chad, very, very important, and some effort should be put there. North Africa, without any doubt. And then in Europe, as an immediate action, would be tagging and monitoring the movements of any birds that arrive to Europe. This would be my contributions.
Yeah, thank you, Jose.
Okay, I think we are almost ready to wrap up. So I want to thank the Recovery and Conservation Plan for Necrophagous birds for inviting us to organize together this symposium, and also thank to everyone for your engagement. I would also like to thank to the panelists for these engaging presentations and discussions, to the interpreters Cristina and Jose Manuel for their good work, and to Erin for helping us with technical issues, visual design, and social network behind the screen. We hope with this symposium to have contributed some way to have an overview of what we know and what we need to know about this species, and helping in some way to design and implement better effective conservation measures to prevent the extinction of this species. Thank you very much for your attention. Please visit our webpage or write for any questions you may have about the project or the things that we do at the IUCN Centre. We will be soon sharing with you a recording of the presentation, so keep in contact, keep safe, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
Thank you. Merci pour tout. Bravo pour l'organisation.
Merci à tous.